Hello, everyone, to the last session of for this room. It is how much does a hack cost? The cost of being digitally attacked. I have the honor to introduce Kara Federow. She has been working and troubleshooting with WordPress for 6 years, including 7 years total with GoDaddy. Ladies and gentlemen, Kara Federow.
Hello, everyone. I'll be presenting to you how much does a hack cost? So we hear all the time in the news, so-and-so company got hacked. You go to a website and see a Google warning. This is a phishing site and offers to take you away from there. You search for something, and before you click on it, there's a warning just underneath the link, this site may be hacked. We see these types of things all the time. In fact, the idea of being hacked is fairly ubiquitous at this point. But what does it mean? And more importantly, what does it actually cost to be hacked? So to start out, I'll just kind of introduce myself a little bit again. I've been with GoDaddy for 7 years total. I've been with Security specifically, which was in fact acquired by GoDaddy a couple of years ago, about 18 months. I'm a website security specialist level 2. So I actually work on remediating the websites. I actually got my BA in Spanish, so I also translate that. I've been working with troubleshooting WordPress for about 6 years. And as you can see, there's some contact information in case you're interested in talking to me about some of this stuff later. So somebody says, I got hacked. So what does that mean? So there are a couple of examples that I'll show you here just to kind of get everybody an idea of what I'm talking about and that kind of thing. So we'll start with credit card skimmers. Which cause credit card thievery. These are usually bits of code that manage to grab the credit card credentials just after they're input by the customer and sent somewhere else. This specifically is some code that I actually worked with at one point, took out of a site. As you can see, if you read code, which some of you do, some maybe you don't. But basically what it's doing is it's taking the credit card credentials and it's putting them into a separate file, which then presumably whoever put this on there on the website would then download that file and then do whatever with the credit card, oftentimes, of course, sell that type of information. This is another type of hack that that I'm sure people have seen before. It's called a defacement. This one is a site that I also personally worked on. Some hacking group got a hold of it, managed to get in and put up this picture. How lovely. All right, so a couple of things here. So what I have here is basically information about getting hacked. And of course, the amount of money that it costs to remediate being hacked depends on a couple of things. Two main things are the industry and actually the country. And we'll go over the industry first. Now, the numbers that you're seeing up here are in millions. And the first number is the 2017 number versus what was found in 2018. And this is how much the industry as a whole had to spend to clean up the hacks. So as you can see, of course, as one can imagine, banking was the top on this kind of thing. Banking information, that's literally just money right there. So I'm sure everybody can understand why. There's utilities, software, automotive, and insurance. Insurance, of course, banking information. I was actually surprised to see some of these other industries up there, but there you have it. This is the information I found. And then, of course, country. Money being what it is, sometimes it depends, of course, on the exchange rate, that type of thing. But fascinatingly, the United States was actually the top of the list by quite a large margin, as you can see, even over Japan. The one thing I found most interesting about these numbers was actually Germany. As opposed to some of these other countries, Germany actually only had an 18% increase, where for the United States, that's about a 30% increase. Same thing with Japan. Germany only had an 18% increase. And what they think that's mostly due to is them making significant investments in technology, mostly in large part due to GDPR coming across. So let's move on here. What are some of the ways in which it actually costs you? What are these factors? So what actually is ransomware? And then we'll also go through a couple other things. Well, oops, sorry, jumping ahead of myself here. So what actually is ransomware? Ransomware attack is when some software is downloaded, usually onto a server or into a company network, and a hacker, this is a basic overview, a hacker is basically able to get in, use credentials, find other credentials, and do anything they can to basically completely shut down operations for this company or a website or whatever. And they usually they'll send a message saying, pay me X amount of money. These days anymore, often in Bitcoin, that kind of thing. So it's rather untraceable. And pay me this amount of money and I will give you your website back, or I'll give you your services back, or whatever it is. Some fascinating and interesting numbers, and I keep jumping ahead here, my apologies, is at the end of 2016, a business fell victim to a ransomware attack about every 40 seconds. Based on some research I did, the company Cybersecurity Ventures predicts that will rise to about every 11 seconds by 2021. So ransomware costs, which is what we're here to discuss, include damage and destruction or loss of data, downtime, lost productivity, post-attack disruption to the normal course of business, and then, of course, after it's already passed, forensic investigation. You need to find out what happened, how did it happen. Also, if they did, in fact, delete any data or all of your data, you need to then restore that. So that also costs a lot of money and time and effort. And then employee training, because as I'll talk about in a minute, one of the biggest ways to avoid ransomware attacks is actually employee training. So it's definitely something that needs to be invested in, but it does, of course, cost money. And as well, and something else I'll talk about as well, as you can see, is customer trust, reputational harm. What happens when your customers find out that you were in fact hacked? What does that mean? So just to continue a little bit with ransomware attacks, though, 91% of cyber attacks began with a spear phishing email. So I'm sure everybody's heard about phishing. It's something that, again, fairly ubiquitous. And basically all it means is that somebody got sent an email that, and especially anymore these days, they look extremely legitimate. Maybe they weren't careful enough, or maybe it wasn't a legitimate looking email. Either way, usually what that is an email is sent directly to someone. This is a spear phishing email. General phishing emails are where they send out just a whole bunch of them to a bunch of people. But they'll send out an email, looks legitimate. Hey, I need your credentials right away. I need to install this thing really quickly just before the end of your workday. It's really important. Customer clicks, puts in their credentials, and now the attacker has them. And then they have access to who knows what, depending on what all this person has access to. Now, as I mentioned, training actually appears to be the best vaccination for this type of thing. In fact, when asked about security tools adopted by their organization that required training, 30% of leaders in their industries provided training for more than 3/4 of users when it was needed, versus just 9% of non-leaders in their industries. For the best at training, only 6% of cybersecurity attacks resulted in a security breach, compared with an average of 11% for the rest. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Now, something else that will cost you is customer trust. Your customers figure out that their credit card details were stolen from your website or from your business. They're going to have a lot of issue maybe going back to your website. It's going to be fairly troubling for them. So for an example, in 2018 on Cyber Monday, mobile shopping, that's just people scrolling through on their phones, hitting the checkout, going through, it hit $2 billion on that day. As well, the average online order for this day and age at this point for this year, for 2019, was $128.08. So if you have an online business where you actually sell something, the average overall order online was $128. So imagine that you've had a ransomware attack, or you've had some other type of intrusion to your website. Somebody put a credit card skimmer on there, and that's now how many customers that won't come back, and that's how much money that you're now losing out on. So now we're going to move on to some major examples of some big companies. I know that we've all heard about the next one. I don't know if everybody's heard about what happened with the second one, but we'll start out with Equifax. Where's my credit? This affected so very many people. I know I myself got the email about it. I'm sure everybody found out about it. Pretty devastating in general. So I'll just kind of give an overview of what actually happened from a technical perspective. In March 2017, unidentified individuals discovered the presence of a known vulnerability in software running on Equifax's online dispute portal that could be used to obtain access to the system. So vulnerabilities on updated software. In May of that year, attackers exploited the vulnerability and began to extract data containing personally identifiable information from Equifax's information systems. And then on March 10th, specifically, unidentified individuals scanned the company's systems. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. So basically, that's what happened, is they were able to find a vulnerability. They were able to get in using that vulnerability that allowed them to execute commands directly on the servers, which is anybody who's done any kind of technical work knows that that's pretty bad. So just as kind of an idea of how much, because I believe, if I recall correctly from what I've seen, it's mostly still ongoing at this point, but just as kind of a basic thing, they had their contract with the IRS terminated, and that cost them $7.25 million. So pretty expensive just to start out with on a basic level. The next one that happened is the Marriott. Kind of an overview of what happened as well. Marriott acquired the Starwood brand of hotels in 2016. However, Starwood's compromise had happened in 2014. They were still using their old IT infrastructure. And even after Marriott had acquired them, they were not migrated to Marriott's reservation system. As well, there was the Wall Street Journal had actually reported that Starwood employees had continued to find the reservation system very difficult to secure. There actually had been a different attacker that breached the system in 2015 and actually was not detected for 8 months. So security was a problem that wasn't properly invested in. And then Marriott decided to get rid of all of the IT staff that was actually caring for this very old, unsecure system. So you had a continuity of care problem. Now, in 2018, finally, so now this is 4 years after the initial intrusion, suspicious activity was actually finally flagged by an internal security tool. In their investigation, Marriott found data that the hackers had encrypted and attempted, quite probably successfully, to remove from the Starwood systems. By November, they had managed to decrypt that data and discover that it included information from up to 500 million guest records. Many of the records, including extremely sensitive information like credit card and passport numbers. Investigators began scouring the system for clues and discovered a remote access Trojan along with Mimikatz, a tool for sniffing out username and password combos in system memory. So that can be a big problem if you have any old credentials or maybe just some old users hanging around, something like that that need to be deleted, but for whatever reason haven't. Something we'll get back to in a little bit. Now, together, these two tools could have given the attackers control of the administrator account. It's not actually clear how the remote access Trojan was placed onto the Starwood server, but going back to something we were talking about earlier, such Trojans are often downloaded from phishing emails, and it's reasonable to assume that this was the case here. It's kind of a side note, something I found very interesting about this particular attack. They actually are thinking that it might be Chinese hackers. The code and attack patterns used match up with techniques employed by state-sponsored Chinese hackers. The attackers use a cloud hosting space frequently used by Chinese hackers. And another clue is that this breach is part of a government attack rather than mere cyber criminals is the fact that none of those millions of very valuable records end up for sale on the dark web. This does not appear to be a mere plundering raid. And as for how much it's cost them, as of March 2019, the company had incurred $28 million in expenses related to the breach. And as well, separately from that, in July of 2019, the UK Information Commissioner's Office levied a fine of 99 million pounds, which is more than $120 million, for violating British citizens' privacy rights under GDPR. They are, just so everyone knows, they are actually being held responsible for this hack, even though it happened before they acquired Starwood, it continued to happen under their care. So something else to keep in mind. So let's go ahead and get into what are some of the preventative measures that we can now get into, because we've talked about all the kinds of things that can happen, different ways it can cost you, price signs, all that kind of stuff. But what are some of the preventative measures that we can have here? And one of the main things that we have here, any and all of these examples I have are just simply data loss prevention at this point. That's all it amounts to. And that's really what needs to be invested in. And just so you know, I am going to be giving prices for some companies. I'll actually name some of these companies in here based on research that I did for this. But I am not actually advertising these. These are just simply examples for pricing for various organizations if I name any of these companies. So let's move into it. What is data loss prevention? Data loss prevention software, which is pretty much what we'll be talking about here. It detects potential data breaches and data exfiltration transmissions and prevents them by monitoring, detecting, and blocking sensitive data while in use, while in motion, and while at rest. The terms data loss and data leak are related and often used interchangeably. Data loss prevention is a set of tools and processes used to ensure that sensitive data is not lost, misused, or accessed by unauthorized users. So going back to our Equifax example, had they kept up to date with all of their information, in fact, they had been provided information just simply 2 days before the actual hack happened that they had this vulnerability on their server and did not act quickly enough to deal with it. As well with Marriott, they decided to get rid of their old IT staff. Starwood hadn't made the proper investments ahead of time, and they are where they are now. So, a couple of different methods that you can do this. Identity access management. If you log into anything for a company that you may work for, you're probably using this type of data loss prevention. So identity access management in enterprise IT is about defining and managing the roles and access privileges of individual network users and the circumstances in which users are granted or denied those privileges. Those users might be customers, customer identity management, for example, or employees, employee identity management. The core objective of IAM systems is one digital identity per individual. Now, once that digital identity has been established, it must be maintained, modified, and monitored throughout each user's access lifecycle. So say you get a promotion, suddenly you have more access. Say you decide to leave the company, well, they need to get rid of that access. That type of thing. So some IAM cost examples, one that I personally use in my work, it is Okta. And one thing I found was interesting, their prices were at $2 per user per month, but they had a $1,500 annual contract minimum. There's Active Directory, which I know a number of people I'm sure are familiar with, that had a $6 per user per month price tag. And then two others I found were Oracle Identity Cloud Service at $5 per user per month, and OneLogin at $4 per user per month, but it does have a minimum of 10 users, so you're really looking at about $40 per user per month. But again, think about how much that is versus getting hacked. Now, firewalls. You have a couple different types of firewalls, and I'll talk about two of them really. The general firewall that we tend to think about is a network security device. It monitors incoming and outgoing traffic and permits or blocks data based on a certain set of security rules. Its purpose is to establish a barrier between your internal network and incoming traffic from external sources, such as the internet, in order to block malicious traffic like viruses and hackers. Now, the cost for host-based firewalls is usually around $100 or less, but enterprise firewalls can cost over $25,000. The most popular medium-range business firewalls cost from about $1,500 to about $5,000, but that's actually just simply the initial purchase price. There are more features that may cost more depending on the firewall. A couple of examples of things that firewalls do: web caching, centralized management and reporting, spam filtering, high availability, so you want to make sure it's up as much as possible, screens URLs for potential for things like phishing emails, that kind of thing, antivirus, and then of course, someone to run it and someone to update it. Another option is actually web application firewall. So say you just have mostly just a website, that's all you've got. You might want to look into some of these. There were some offerings that were at $299.99 per site per year that also included firewalls, cleanups, that type of thing. There was another offering I found that was just simply the web application firewall at $99 per year per license, so basically per site. A couple other things we have here as well are security, intelligence, and threat sharing. This is actually something that can be done for free. However, needs someone that knows how to gather and analyze the information, and thusly the cost of the person and their services. As well, advanced perimeter controls is really the last one. That's the major way that you can do a lot of this data loss prevention. And this can be anything from like physical security, like fences, badges, an actual physical person. Network security, I found. You have two kind of options. You have a more reactive system, which is the intrusion detection system, as well as an intrusion prevention system, which is more of the proactive version. So for the IDS, the intrusion detection system, this functions as an alarm system for your network that's used to detect and alert on suspicious activity. This system can be built from a single device or collection of sensors placed at strategic points around the network. And the intrusion prevention system, compared to the IDS, which will simply notify administrators of possible threats, and IPS can actually attempt to automatically defend the target without the administrator's direct intervention. So if you've already got rules set up for it, that kind of thing, it just goes, nope, you don't get to come in, and just stops it right there. But for pricing, a good baseline is that agents can cost between $500 and $2,000 each, and consoles may cost in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. But this does not include the operating system, hardware, or maintenance costs, or, of course, the administrators themselves. So, and here's some of the sources where I found some of the information, especially for things like Marriott, for Equifax, that kind of thing. And if anybody would like those sources, I'm happy to send them to them. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Actually, I had a question, Kara. Great presentation. When it comes to basically keeping a track of the threats out there, are there particular websites or new articles that you check so you make sure you know what threats are out there? I guess so you're pretty proactive.
Yes, actually, I do tend to check Security's website quite often. The blog is very interesting, has a lot of stuff going on, and tends to have a lot of really good updated information. Occasionally I've seen stuff on Ars Technica, not very often, although occasionally, and there are a couple other websites. There was actually just one I found recently, two I found recently. I don't recall them off the top of my head.
Okay, let's see if there's anything coming from the chat. That seems to be the only question we have. Like I said, Kara, great presentation. Thank you for sharing all this great information. Round of applause to everybody who's on, if you can, in the chat for Kara.